Hi everybody, welcome back to EFIC TV. This is Dr. Mary O'Keefe. We're on day 2 of the EFIC Congress in Budapest. It's going great. I hope you're enjoying watching the various interviews. So this one is a bit different. So we're reaching out to academics who might be interested in moving from academia to industry, and we're really lucky to be joined by someone who has successfully made that leap. So we're here with Dr. Jan Jastorff. So thank you, Jan, for joining us. Can you tell us a bit about yourself, who you are, where you're from?
Yeah, sure. Happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
No problem.
As you said, I'm Jan Jastorff. I work in Grünenthal in Global Medical Affairs. I'm originally from Germany, but since 18 years I'm living in Leuven in Belgium.
Great. And tell us about your story and your background in academia.
I started studying neuroscience actually, so I did a bachelor's in neuroscience in Zurich in Switzerland.
Yep.
And then I moved on to do a master's in neuroscience again in Tübingen in Germany. Then I stayed on in Tübingen to do a PhD there. And after the PhD, I moved to Belgium, to Leuven, to work as a postdoc at the university hospital there in Leuven. Then I stayed on and did another postdoc there. And afterwards, I was lucky enough to get a PI position in Leuven, where I was working for 5 years in a research project, a collaborative project that was funded by the university. And then it was kind of a bit the turning point or the decision, okay, either I'm going to stay on now and to continue and look for a professorship, or this might be kind of the last chance in a way to think of something else. And that's what I did then.
So you did 2 masters, PhD, 2 postdocs, successfully secured a PI position, and close enough to securing a professorship, would that be right?
I would have probably, if I would have moved on, I guess it would have worked out. Probably not in Leuven, but yeah, you have to be a bit flexible in academia.
So what was the trigger? What made you think I'd like to move to the pharmaceutical industry? I'd like something different. When did that come? What did it feel like?
It was kind of a slow process, I would think. When I started studying and when I was working in academia, I always had the goal to become a professor. So it was kind of clear that that was the end goal. But the longer I was working there, the more I was wondering, okay, is this really what I want to do for the rest of my life? And the main reason was probably that I really liked what I was doing. I liked the research, I liked the discussions, the teaching, thinking of experiments and working on your own data and so on. But it was probably clear that there will never be a real application of what I was doing in the end. So I was already doing translation in neuroscience. I was working with patients, but it was all kind of so small scale that it would probably never reach any patient in real life, be implemented in treatment, whatever. So, and that was kind of then at some point the decision, maybe I should switch fields a bit and go into the pharmaceutical industry, because there I think the end goal is kind of to reach a patient and to have an impact on that patient in a positive way, obviously. And I was doubting whether I would achieve that in academia.
And how soon into the academic journey did that doubt come in, that you were like, oh, I don't see my work here being translated or implemented into clinical practice? Was it towards the end, or was it there a few years where you were doubting it? Or what did it look like?
More towards the end, I think. It was not so much when I was doing my postdoc or so. There I just enjoyed the research and I liked what I was doing. Working as a PI, because you always think, okay, there's the next step and something else happens, but then working as a PI, I was wondering, okay, next step would be professor. It's probably not so much different from what I was doing at that moment. And yeah, to turn that around and go into something that would really have an impact, I didn't really see that happening. So
So you plucked up the courage and decided to make the transition after a while. So what did you do? What did it look like? How did you go about trying to get a position in the pharmaceutical industry?
I had a bit of a head start, maybe because my wife was already working in industry, so
Okay.
it was not a completely black box to me. Still, coming from academia, it's a bit confusing world, the industry. You have a lot of different job titles, job description, and it's not very obvious what the work actually will be that you're going to do in the end. I also have to say I applied at not just one position, but several positions. I had a couple of interviews, so it took quite some time, maybe about half a year or so, before I found a position where I think, okay, this could be a good match, and where they actually also thought, okay, I would be a good match. And then I started as an MSL, a medical science liaison, with Bial, like the small Portuguese pharma company, in their German affiliate.
And what were the main challenges you experienced from moving from academia to pharmaceutical industry? So when you were doing those interviews, what were the skills that maybe you were being asked for or to prove when you were putting in those CVs? Was there something you were lacking that was coming against you in interviews, or did you find it okay?
I think initially I was probably focusing too much on my research, what I was doing, and my skills as a researcher, because that's kind of what you are trained on, obviously, and that's what you're proud of. But I was maybe not so much focusing on other kind of translational skills, so that came a bit later on, understanding the process a bit better, because when you're working in academia, it's not just your science, your research, that you're an expert in this one field, but you're gaining a lot of knowledge around that, right? You're reading publications, you are summarizing complex data, you are discussing with experts, you're designing experiments, you know a bit of statistics, you're kind of trained to understand complex publications, and also to see a bit where there might be a logical flaw in what they are proposing, things like this. And this is all work that you can use also in the pharmaceutical industry. I like teaching, so that's also part of educating people that you can do also in the pharmaceutical industry. So there were a lot of these skills that you gather while you are doing your PhD, your postdoc, your academic work, that you can actually apply later on. And I probably had to learn a bit how to bring that out more, because maybe it's not immediately obvious to everyone in HR, in the industry, that you come with these skills.
So did you have to maybe apply more of the skills, as opposed to, I did this research, I did this neuroscience? It's more, I have this skill and this is how it could fit with your company.
Exactly. So kind of to really understand what the job description is, to see and how to explain how your skills that you have acquired actually would fit with that. That's maybe something, a bit of a learning process that I had to get into.
So starting day one, when you got the job in Grunenthal, what were the main skills or new things that you needed to learn to be good at that job, or to fit in? So you had skills coming from academia, things that you could bring to Grunenthal, but what were the things that you had to learn to then actually go forward in that job?
Well, initially, when I started at Bial, it was kind of one thing is to understand. You have a lot of different functions in the industry, to understand what their role all is, and you're working together with many of them to understand what they need from you and what they can give you. That's something that I had to learn, and that takes some time. And I think also something that was very different is when you work in academia, you're talking about your own research, right? So you have done all the steps, so you know exactly how it worked, what you have done, why, and so on. You know the data very well. But when you're in industry, you're usually not talking about your own results, but you're talking about the results of the company, right? So you're explaining data and results that you have not gathered yourself. So that's, I think, also a big difference.
So what does your role actually look like in comparison to, let's say, a day in the life of Jan in Grunenthal versus a day in the life of Jan as an academic? What does it look like?
What I'm doing in Grüntal now, I think, is much more diverse. So when you're working in academia, you kind of plan your day. You kind of have your experiment lined up. You know the subject will come in at that time, and then you're going to do that, and then you will analyze the data. So it's a bit more predictable, I think. What I'm doing now, because I'm involved in so many different projects, you are in contact with a lot of different functions, people. Every day is quite different, and it's also relatively difficult to plan actually up front. So usually you kind of have a bit of a plan of what you want to achieve during that day. It's probably a good day if I get half of the things done. But in between I have interactions that are also very interesting and where I learn a lot and that bring me a bit in a different direction. And
so it's more diverse, do you think?
I think it is more diverse, yeah.
Is that the key difference for the people listening in? Would that be the key difference between being in academia and industry? So diversity of what you have to do, or what would you say are the key differences?
Diversity is, I think, one difference, but another difference is that you can't really choose so much in industry anymore what you're going to work on. When you're in academia, you have your plan, you have your ideas, your research projects. You can write grants. If you're lucky, some of them get funded. So then you have funding for 3 years or to hire a PhD student, whatever, and it's your research that you're working on, right? And this is very different in the industry, right? So you're not so much focused on this one thing that you're doing, but yeah, you are working together with a lot of people, but you also have a common goal in the end, which is kind of to help in the end, as I said, to reach patients and to have an impact on their lives.
And in terms of a person, if they really like researching a particular topic, let's say they love neuroscience in a particular disease, should they then look for a company that is dedicated to finding new medicines for that disease? Or should they be more broad in their thinking when they want to move to industry? Because the logical thing would be, I really enjoy this condition. I really enjoy doing research on diabetes, for example, or some form of neuroscience involved in a certain condition. Should you then say, I'll apply to a company that focus on that condition? Or is that very narrow-minded? Just for an academic that might be thinking that way.
I think that's kind of probably the most logical way of thinking when you're coming from academia, because you say, okay, I'm an expert in this receptor, and this receptor plays a role in that disease, so I apply to a company and I go into R&D in that company and I continue to work on that receptor. But this is probably, if you're just focusing on that, I think you will not have very good chances of finding a
Stay
job.
in academia, basically. Yeah.
So I think you have to be much more broad, because of course there is part in R&D where you can do kind of probably similar things that you have been doing in academia. But there are many other jobs in industry where these kind of skills that you have acquired fit in, which are not really related to research. And that's something you should be open. I think especially you should be open to this when you're starting and looking for the first job in industry, because usually when you read job descriptions, they always look for experience in the industry of 2 years or 5 years and so on, and you are coming without experience, so you have to explain why this is still relevant for the job, and you need to see for example, for me, I came in as a medical science liaison. You're not doing research there anymore. You're discussing science with experts, for example, but you're not doing research yourself anymore. Another kind of entry or easier entry could be you're working as a medical writer, for example, because you know how to write publications and things like this. You have trained that in the past in your academic career, so you can apply these skills also in the industry. You can work as a medical information scientist, maybe things. These are all kind of entry-level positions, maybe, where you could apply the skills that you have. But they are all not really research related anymore, but they are more broad.
So you think if somebody wants to make the move, they should be open to any of those pathways initially?
Of
like
course,
medical writer, RD.
It should be something that you like, right? If you don't like writing publications, and this was always kind of a burden during your academic career, and you always were hoping somebody else would write the paper for you and you just deliver the results, then that's probably not the right path, right? But if that's something you liked, why not try to go in this direction? And I think you should be really open to other kind of this entry-level positions, and you should always think this is not what I'm going to do for the next 25 years, because once you start to work in the industry, you're getting exposure to a lot of different roles there. You understand more what the different people are doing, and you might find something, oh, this guy over there, this looks very interesting, maybe I try to develop into that direction. And there is, I think, always the possibility of changing paths in the industry much easier than you could do that in academia, right?
Yeah. And so you're saying there's certain roles that they're an easier pathway in, but once you're in that role, you can then kind of be promoted or move to another role if you get more experience. Is that the way it is?
Yeah, because you understand a bit better what the different functions are actually about. And then you might find something, okay, this one suits me maybe better, or this could be interesting for me. And there is always the possibility to learn on the job, right? So you see what the other person is doing, you can have a lot of discussions, you can say, look, this is something I would like to do in the future, what can we do that I gain some skills that I can apply these in this job later on. And my experience was that in the industry they are all usually very open to develop people, and many people have very diverse roles that they have filled in their industry professional career there. So I think that's really nothing exceptional also. And also maybe what you could also consider is, now we're just talking about the industry, so pharma companies, but you also have CROs, so contract research organizations, for example, that are looking also for people that are working for pharma then, so they're kind of pharma can outsource certain jobs to these other companies. So that could be also an entry way to get into kind of this pharma world and then to move on from there.
And in terms of entry, when you say the word entry, is there a classic way to enter industry from academia? So as you said, you did the 2 masters, PhD, postdocs, and then so you did a lot of academic experience built up to go to pharmaceutical industry. If there was someone just out of PhD, would they be at a disadvantage for going straight to industry, or an advantage, or does it matter? Is it maybe depends on the job description or the individual?
I don't think that my long time in academia really was super beneficial for for getting into a pharma role. I think you can enter at different levels. You could do a master's and you could try to work in the industry. That's perfectly possible, I think. You could do a PhD and you could try to enter that. I don't even think that the entry point would be very different in these two stages, but it could be that later on, if you want to move up somewhere in the company, that for a certain position they might say, oh, it would be better if you would have a PhD. So there might be some positions that you might not be able to fill then later on if you start earlier. a postdoc itself, I think, is also not. It's not a bad idea because you're gaining additional experiences. So you could always argue that when you're working as a postdoc, you are working more independent. As a PhD, you kind of have your supervisor. You're discussing a lot of things. When you are a postdoc, you are more independent in your work. You start to supervise your own PhD students and so on. So you could always argue that this still brings value to the job later on that you want to do in industry.
Yeah.
But yeah, doing 2, 3, or 5 postdocs, I don't think that really makes a big difference in the end anymore.
What about if you've done your PhD, you're fairly certain that you want to move to pharmaceutical industry? Is there any benefit at all to saying, oh, I'll do 2 years postdoc to get a bit more experience? Or if you know you're going to jump ship, so to speak, should you just go once you know? Or is there a benefit from getting some of that leadership skills that you might get from doing a bit of a postdoc? It doesn't have to be 3 to 4 postdocs that you would get from just being a PhD student. Is that leadership qualities?
I think for
important?
yourself, this is probably good. I'm not really sure if this is seen in your interview, if you interview for a job, because you're going into this more entry-level position probably, where this is maybe at that moment not that relevant. So in that respect, if you have made the decision you don't want to stay in academia, I don't think it makes a lot of sense to prolong this, to make the switch, because in this, let's say, 2 or 3 years that you would do as a postdoc in the university, you gain experience there, obviously, but otherwise you would gain 3 years experience in the pharma industry in your job there, which is also relevant, of course. So I don't think that I would really advise someone to stay longer in academia if they think I anyway don't want to stay.
You say that in the job description, it's often required or maybe seen as positive if you have pharmaceutical industry experience in the past. How did someone like you navigate that didn't have the experience? How do you go about writing the CV, or do you just not apply if it says requirement, past experience?
I would ignore that.
Okay. Just be brave
I would still, of course, if they ask for 5, you have to look a bit at the job description, right? You have to be realistic. Usually they explain quite well what they are looking for in the candidate. If they want to have someone who has 5 years of experience, I think it's very difficult and very bold to apply and to hope that you get invited. Maybe you have to, if you're lucky, maybe it works. But I think it's important when you apply that you really try to understand what this role actually entails in the end, what the work looks like that you're going to do, and try also to focus in your letter and in when you are explaining your motivation to apply for this job, to bring across that you know what you are going to do in this job, and to highlight that you have many of the skills that you are looking for, even though you were not in the past 2 years already working in the industry.
So highlight that the skills you have can be transferred to the benefit of industry.
Yes, exactly. So let's say if you are applying for like I did in my case in a medical science liaison job, right? So usually also there it's always written experience in industry is a plus. But many things in that job you have also done in academia. So if you explain that, you might have a chance to get around this problem.
So say if one has made the decision they want to go to the pharmaceutical industry, they don't have any previous experience, they're in academia at the moment, where do they start? So because I know in a lot of universities you're doing your PhD, your master's, there isn't an interaction in most universities with industry, to connect people as part of a PhD or postdoc that you'd be working, have a collaboration between maybe industry and research. So you're starting cold almost, really, going from academia to industry. How would a person start making those links? Do they reach out to industries just specifically through some mechanism, just email them, wait for an application to come up, or do you be a bit bold and just reach out, even though there isn't a job space at the moment?
I think you can always try that, and I think also companies would always say, we welcome your application. I'm not really sure how successful you will be with that, because you're kind of applying for something you don't really know what you're applying for. So it's difficult to explain how you fit that role that is actually not yet there, right? So for me, the more logic way would be, but maybe other people have different opinions, would be there are always job advertisements, right? So to read through this, to see what the different jobs are, spend some time to understand what the role actually would be, if that's something that fits you. If possible, if you have any network connections and someone you know that knows someone that works in the industry, to get a bit of an insight of what all these different jobs actually are, to better tailor your application to that actual job later on. I think that would be very useful. You can try to reach out, I don't know, through LinkedIn or something. You can try to connect with people that, let's say, if you really want to work in this one pharma company, you could try to find connection there, to get a bit of an advice. I didn't do that. I'm not sure how successful you will be with that, but it's also a possibility you could try, obviously.
Yeah, it wouldn't be looked on negatively if you did that. It's just that if there isn't a position there available, it's hard to maybe sell yourself for a position that doesn't exist at the moment. But a person should try and be proactive from the get-go. If they're interested, they need to be looking up the website, looking for vacancies, going along to talks.
Try to understand what is the therapeutic area this company is working on, what are their values, or read a bit about the company. All these things are, I think, very useful, so that you need to try to stand out a bit from all the applications, right? And the better you can show that you understood that company and you understood that role, and you really want to work there, I think the better are your chances. But of course, to maximize chances, you shouldn't just focus on this one job and say, okay, I will only apply there and I will only do this. It might work out, but you might also have to wait very long then until that actually turns out positively. So I would also advise to be a little more flexible maybe in your initial job. Of course, it should be something where you think that fits you and you would like to do that, because it's not that you join for 6 months and then you do something else. That's usually not the case. So it should be something where you think, okay, I can do that for 3 years. Just don't think I have to do this for 25 years, basically.
But it's similar to academia in that if you apply for a job in academia, like a grant, you could be waiting a year until you find out. So if you go for an interview for one industry job and you get kicked back, it's still not as long as the wait maybe in academia to find out about the next position you have. There's lots of interviews you could be going to, and maybe one of them would come off.
Yeah, there are more jobs you could, there are more jobs you could apply for, I think.
Yeah, you're not waiting on, one opportunity and then wait for the next year for, there's probably a few roles coming up, or different job availabilities. If you are a bit more flexible
and you don't say, okay, because I live here, I need to work at the company that is 10 kilometers away from my place and I don't want to move anywhere else, I only want to work there. These are things where you limit your options, obviously.
What would you say, this is, maybe it's difficult, it depends on the industry, but what are the key research skills that you think industries at the moment really like, that they really welcome? Skills that a person as a PhD or postdoc has gained. What would be the key ones that might be important? Or does it just really vary? Are there any specific ones?
I'm not really working in R&D, so I can't really say, okay, this is kind of the technique, or that's where all the companies are focusing now in their research and development. If you've done that, that would be a big plus. I think if you're going outside of R&D, this doesn't matter that much. I think what mainly matters is that you have shown in your career that you can adapt, that you can learn quickly new things, that you are flexible. So these kind of things are, I think, more important than the exact technique you have been working on.
Before we finish, do you have any top tips for people considering making the leap or making the transition? Is there anything you would have done differently to make it easier for yourself, or any tips that you give to in the future to anybody? Anything that we've missed in our interview?
No, I think as I can say, you should be broad. I think that's one tip. Don't focus too much on one thing. And as we discussed also, if you think you don't want to stay in academia, don't stay on and on and on because just somebody offered you another postdoc and you say, okay, I do another 2 years. But if you don't really see a future there, and if you're not gaining so much by staying on in academia, other than if you really like it, of course, then doing 2 more years of something that you really like, why not, right? And then you can try to apply afterwards. In my case, as I said, I could have done the switch earlier probably. I could have started the same MSL job that I was doing in Bial. I could have probably done after doing 1 postdoc instead of staying another 7 years in academia. But also in the 7 years, I enjoyed the time, right? It's not lost time. It's only if you think you don't want to stay on, don't delay it unnecessarily.
And what would you say now, reflecting on your position, what are the key benefits for working within industry? So we've discussed the differences. What would you say are the key benefits versus academia for you?
Yeah, so one benefit I mentioned, that's the application, for sure. But I think there are also other benefits and something that I also experienced that is a bit different from academia is that you kind of have this common goal. You're working together with a lot of people from different backgrounds that all do different tasks, but in the end there is kind of this one common goal of this team. And in academia, you always talk about a lot of collaboration and common projects and so on. But in the end, there's also a bit of a competition, of course, always, because in the end you are competing for the same grants. There's not infinite money there, right? So you kind of try to always have a bit of an edge somewhere in comparison to the people you collaborate with, so that in the end you are a valuable asset to this broad team in a way. So in my understanding or in my experience, I really like this common work and this common goal in the industry, and I think that is really, I enjoy working like this. I don't feel competition with any one of these other functions because everybody fulfills a different part of this puzzle, right? So you're not competing against each other, you're kind of working together.
Yeah. And before we finish, is there anything else you'd like to say? Anything else you'd like to add? Anything we've missed?
No, I don't know. Just as I said, try it out. Believe in that you have actually learned some skills that are useful in the industry, that it's not wasted time that you have spent in academia, just try it out and see. I think it is, it depends a bit on at what stage you are leaving academia. I think it is not really a decision that you cannot reverse anymore, but it is, of course, a big step. So you need to kind of also you need to be sure that, okay, this is really one direction I want to go. And if you really like to work in this one topic and to be the absolute expert in this one receptor subtype, and and you want to know everything about that, then most likely, and that's really what gets you going, that's probably industry is not the right place for you, maybe.
But for you, are you happy that you were achieving your goal that you were having doubts on in academia? So the application, implementation, translation, are you now happy that you're moving towards that goal, that you feel that that's happening?
Yeah. So I really have the feeling that what I'm working on in the end will be applied somewhere and should have an impact on patients' lives. And I think that is that motivates me to continue this work.
Great. Thanks, Jan. That was great. I hope everyone listening enjoyed that and got some insights into moving from academia